The following is an interview with Professor Maryemma Graham of the University of Kansas, conducted by Lindsay Stewart at the Penn State University as part of the 2012 National Endowment for the Humanities Summer Institute on Contemporary African American Literature.
Thank you for being with us, Dr. Graham. How would you describe your approach to teaching African American literature as a tradition?
Well, thanks for inviting me. So how would I teach African American literature? What is my approach? I think that I would say that my approach is always to start where students are. So generally, African American literature courses are self-selected. Mm-hmm. Students choose to enter those classes. Very few places have them required as a diversity requirement or whatever, which of course I would strongly encourage, but that is not the case. This is not the perfect world. So I think I do want to start where students are. So I will often ask what books people have read, and I might ask them to do it on a card. Or since I do more social networking in my class, I might ask people, once I see who the class makeup is, I will ask them to send a note that I will then post on Blackboard. What are the most popular titles people have read? And I'll ask them when. Was it in high school? Was it in college? So I get a sense of what they've read. I often give a tentative syllabus out the first day. And when I get this new knowledge, I revise it accordingly. Okay. I take books off. I might put a different assignment in that sends them to different core books. I rely heavily on individual texts. I do not use anthologies. Let me make it clear. Okay. I do not use anthologies. I really do want students to read a full text. But it does dictate how many books I can use. But the approach is always to go from what they know. I prefer the historical approach or the thematic, depending upon the course. If it's the survey course, of course, you go history. But I often, within the history, I will do pairing. And therefore, I won't just start with a Frederick Douglass or a Harriet Jacobs. I will pair a Douglass with a more contemporary text. And I do that to get students to see the tradition on the one hand and the way it's changed. So those are probably my overriding principles for teaching, is to get students from point A to point B, but point A is determined by where they are. I do a lot of group work. Ultimately, I think students have to learn how to work collaboratively. And I do that in all of my classes. And I do presentations, so they have to get up in the front and perform. The shyness has to be combated, because many students come to college, even graduate students, who are terrified at the idea of giving a presentation. So my classes require sometimes more than one.
Do you think your approach has changed over the years? Did you ever use anthologies?
I did. I did use anthologies because it was a popular thing to do and I was learning how to teach. So in my up-ramp mode, I did use anthologies. My second step was to create my own readings. So when publishers started sending people around to do customized publishing, and I'd say I did that for about 10 years. I always created my own textbook for readings, critical readings, and then I would have students write individual texts. But that was because the body of critical literature was still pretty hard to come by. But the anthologies, by that time, were out for me. So maybe I used them for 5 years. But pedagogy is very much tied, pedagogical methods is very much tied to the theme of the class and what I want students to, learner outcomes, as we say. And my learner outcomes are also tied to what goes beyond the class and what transfers over into other classes that you take, especially if you're not teaching majors. So I'm very interested in students taking knowledge and making use of it. Whether it's a literature class or a culture class, a class on gender. I want the knowledge to transfer out and not just fulfill the requirement and pass the exam and get a grade.
So thinking more about African American literature as a tradition, what was your response to Ken Warren's proclamation that African American literature is over since segregation?
My first response is that I appreciate Ken's boldness in making such a claim, and perhaps his understanding of the literature operates from a particular perspective. But in criticism of that position, I mean, it is a position, and I
Right.
respect the position, that is not how I understand the tradition. For me, the tradition is dynamic, so there's constant change. And one of the things that's most exciting about it and has kept me in the field is to see where the tradition continues, or we might say tradition and continuity, but where innovation and change are occurring. And so I think that most people have to find that middle ground between tradition and continuity, innovation and change. So for me, the literature is not so much about a body of texts as it is about the process of transformation that those texts engage. So the dynamism is central to that process.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these new Black literatures. What issue or trend in African American literature has interested you lately?
Well, I think I'm a macro person. I like to look at the large body and see what the distribution is. Since I've taught autobiography and the slave narrative for a long time, naturally I'm intrigued by variations of what we call the neo-slave narrative, or confessional literature, or witness literature, because that also connects Black literature with a global literature, where people are witnessing experiences and talking about those experiences in narrative. So I do know that that's a very big trend. Witness, confessional, narrative, self-presentation. You might call it autobiography, which is a more Western term, but the literature of self-presentation. I think Black literature has a particularly significant place in that, because there's been so much in the culture of representing us or being represented through constructions of others. And so the self-presentation is now something that people focus on a lot, as to combat and counter what those other constructions have been. So, and even if it's fiction, I think it still boils down to self-representation. That is how you are representing an experience based on what you understand that representation to be truthfully or untruthfully before. So that's intriguing. There was how people are figuring or structuring self-representation in literature, or any kinds of representation. Now, we tend to think in terms of genres. So we talk about fiction or drama or poetry. Within fiction, there's even further, stratification. And I think Black literature, contemporary Black literature, is especially rich with lots and lots of innovative, new narrative forms. Women entered the market as both writers, and they've always been readers. Right now we're told that 75% of the reading market is women, and probably within that, I would suspect more than 50% of those would be Black, or people of color. I mean, I don't know the stats. I do know that we have a huge market of women readers, and so fiction pertaining to women, whether it's romance or even if it's soft porn or whatever you want to label it, but that body of literature is very, very significant. More exciting for me are probably the blended genres that are occurring, where you have visual, you have music, but particularly visual and written text, the graphic novel coming out of the comic book form. And people are able to teach history in a different way through the graphic novel. So those can be some very complex texts, but they can also have wide audiences that are cross-generational, because it doesn't require the same level of written literacy, but it does require a certain visual literacy. And we're living in a time when visual literacy is very much, is more common among people. It is more practiced among people. And because of that, the novel has adapted to this new form. So the graphic novel is one of our newest and most innovative forms. Japanese have had graphic novels, other cultures have had graphic novels, and so now I think Black graphic novels leave a lot of opportunity for people to examine
So moving on to thinking more about, like, concretely about the Institute, how did you prepare for your sessions?
It was like a graduate class, condensed and intense. That is, it gave me an opportunity to look at some things and to test some ideas that I had been thinking about, kicking around, but needed to flesh out a little bit more. And I knew that I would be meeting a captive audience of well-informed, well-educated people, because there is an application process. You are, in effect, applying for a program. You never quite know what the mix is going to be until you get there. But it was very much like teaching a short-term graduate class with very dedicated participants. And so, in a sense, you're on trial, because all of your knowledge has to be brought to bear, because this is not someone that you may have a chance to take a class from later, or students that you will encounter later in your career at that particular institution. This is a one-shot deal. So you have to give it all you have in this one shot.
Well, thank you for being with us today, Dr. Graham.
Well, thank you, Lindsay, and good luck in your career.